Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of David's Divergent Discussions. I'm your host, David Gray-Hammond, and today I'm joined by Tanya Adkin, Nick Walker, and Fergus Murray. Um, I'm looking forward to this one. I think it's going to be a good one. I'll start with a brief audio descriptions. So I am David Gray-Hammond. I'm a white Mediterranean male presenting person in their mid-30s. I have a beard, a shaved head, a lip piercing, and I'm wearing sunglasses. Tanya, would you like to do an audio description?
Yeah, I'm a white female presenting person with some green diamond wallpaper behind them, with my hair tied back at the minute. I've got dark hair, glasses, and a white jumper on.
And Nick, would you like to do a...
Hello, yes, Dr. Nick Walker. I am a middle-aged trans feminine person who doesn't look it, and shaved head, and wearing a blue blazer and a purple shirt, and I got these big old headphones on my head.
Well, and welcome to another episode of David's Divergent. Someone's got to be playing in the background there.
Sorry.
And Fergus, would you like to do a brief audio description?
Sure. I am a white person with long hair, possibly indeterminate gender presentation. And age for that matter. I'm sitting in a fairly messy room, currently wearing a blanket over a shirt of Dogs in Space. And I'm wearing thick-rimmed glasses.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, we're here to talk about Weird Pride. So it is Weird Pride Day today, isn't it? So, Fergus, I think you've been quite a big driver in the existence of Weird Pride Day. Do you want to give us a brief description of what it was that brought Weird Pride Day into existence?
Sure. So, like so many autistic and or queer people, I've been told that I'm weird from a pretty early age. Fortunately, I was raised in a family of people who are quite weird and generally know it. So I was able to sort of come to terms with that quite easily, and it's obvious to me that that made a big difference to my life. Not taking weird as an insult. Um, my mum, Dinah Murray, was an autism person. Very difficult to pin down. She did a lot of sort of bridge building and a certain amount of research and came up with a theory of monotropism. And she made herself a weird pride badge when I was probably about 15 or so. Just a big white badge with weird pride written in big felt tip letters, and she liked to wear that to formal events about autism and that sort of thing. So I credit her for formulating the idea of weird pride. But it has to be said that it's an idea which has repeatedly been reinvented. It's the kind of thing that people spontaneously come up with. So if you search weird pride on the internet, for posts older than about 4 years old, then you'll find there are various accounts using the name and things like that. And Astrid Lundgren using the name Odd Pride on TikTok and making excellent science communication videos. So Dinah, my mum, died about 2.5 years ago. And while she was sick with cancer, I thought it would be fun to have a Weird Pride Day, to make sure that it was an idea that had legs. People keep on talking about it. And it turns out, the internet means that you can just declare that a day is a day, and then it is, if anyone believes you. which they have. So it's been running ever since. March 4th every year, mainly because I like the phrase March 4th, even though that's not how I would personally express dates. But I know that many people will. So marching forth weirdly has always been part of my vision of the whole thing.
Fantastic. So I guess a good place to start might be wondering what weirdness means to us. I know for me, being weird is about more than just who I am. For me, weirdness is kind of a becoming for me. It's intentionally going against the grain. There's a level of intentionality to it in for me because I actually don't want to be normal. I tried being normal. It was not great. Um, so yeah, for me, there's an intentionality. I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in with their thoughts.
I
Nick,
think
maybe?
the weirdness thing as well. It's like, what does weirdness mean to me? I mean, I've never really been a person that you could categorize as normal, so I wouldn't know what. I don't think anybody is. Like, I think it's they're all making it up. It's got to be a big fat lie. So how would I know what weirdness means to me when to me it's not weird, and in the circles that I'm in, it's not weird. So it really is. I suppose it's just like a kind of reclaiming of the othering, isn't it, really, that goes on in society and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think if I was called normal, it would definitely be an insult.
And Nick, did you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I think I mean I totally agree, there about the intentionality of it. And it's I think weirdness is magic. I think weird is almost synonymous with magic to me. Like there's this the normal is like this very mundane world that that tries to make magic impossible, that has very set ideas. Normal to me includes this addiction to the illusion of certainty and these ideas of everything has to stay within our very small, limited conceptions. And what's outside of that, what's outside of the knowable and certain, is the magic. And so weird to me. I think about it like the word queer as a verb sometimes. Like there's this act of weirding, of letting the magic in, of making cracks in the normal to let all the magic in.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because for me, weirdness and neuroqueering in particular are very closely related for me because part of my own journey with queering my neurology is embracing weirdness and knowing that normal doesn't necessarily exist for me because it's not something I've ever been. I tried to, as I said, I tried to do normal or what I thought I was supposed to do for normal, and all I really found was that whatever it is doesn't work for me. So for me, like I see this deep relationship between queering of expectations and weirdness in itself. And I like that description of, letting the magic in because I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Um, I've been thinking quite a lot about the relationship between weirdness and magic. Um, so I don't know if you know this about the word weird, but the way that it came into the English language is via magic. It originally meant fate. The weirds or the weird sisters were the fates. So the witches in Macbeth are the fates. Like they're it's clear from the way that people use the word weird before that that's who he was talking about. Um, and in his version of the story, yeah, they're witches. They're sort of a bit sinister. But in Shakespeare's main source text, they were fairies. So two different ways of being weird and magical, right? Which still sort of resonate in the present day. Um, and yeah, it's a lot of it's about possibility, right? It's about what you believe is possible. And part of the reason why neurodivergent people are so often seen as weird is because sort of we don't like people kind of meet us and they're like, hey, that doesn't seem right. Is that can you do that? Is it okay to do that? So by being, yeah, by being weird, by not trying to pursue normality, you're leaving all sorts of possibilities open, which are shut down by default in societies that we live in.
Yeah, and I like to, rather than thinking of things as impossible, at most I prefer to think of them as improbable. Um, I think, especially when it comes to who we are in our identity, the way we think, feel, act, behave, aside from the things that science as we know it currently strictly doesn't allow for, which, by the way, science seems to be allowing for a lot more with day in, day out. But aside from that, which is, I guess, in a physical sense, an impossibility, I don't see any real boundaries to what a person can be. And for me, I think weirdness is intentionally seeking out that lack of boundaries and seeing just how far out you can push things.
I will say that it doesn't have to be intentional. Like many of us don't actually have a choice not to be weird. And I
No,
mean that's important, right? Because it's a pride movement. It's kind of a liberation movement. Um it's not, you know, I'm not just proud of like actively being weird. I'm refusing to be ashamed because I was weird anyway. I had no choice about it, but I am choosing not to like be scared of being weird. I'm choosing not to be ashamed.
yeah. And I think that that's a good point to make because yeah, I do things with a lot of intentionality now, but I was the weird kid at school when I didn't want to be the weird kid at school. And that had its impacts. And I think that's an important part of the conversation. Um, but I don't know. Tanya, what's been weird been like for you? Have you ever had these sorts of issues with being weird at a time when you would have rather not been weird or
Oh, I think I still have those issues, especially in work capacities, and especially when you are looking, I'm a parent to neurodivergent children, so being weird is quite dangerous as a parent, especially as a mother. Accessing healthcare can be quite, you can be discriminated against because of that. You may choose to disclose or not disclose. There can be meetings, they can be your reactions to things. So I think that's probably why it's important to kind of have the pride kind of element, isn't it? Because being weird is not just about being the weird kid at school. It really can be quite dangerous for us. And that's where the whole pride movement comes in. And I think that's the important thing. We have to acknowledge that it is really difficult for people to lean into that.
Mm.
And it's so risky, but also hopefully the more people that are openly weird, the more it will become accepted. But even in spaces now, for me, there are times and places where it is not safe for to be yourself at all. Um, and I'm quite privileged in terms of what I do for a living, who I know, what my qualification and knowledge is, but it's still not safe. So I think that's why for me it's really important that we do continue to be proud of the weirdness. And also, I like what Fergus, you were saying, it doesn't have to be intentional, but it also doesn't have to be big either. It can be private, it can be in any way that you are safe to do that. So yeah, I think that for me is the weird pride thing for me.
Yeah, we do need to talk about privilege, right? This comes up in the context of unmasking a lot when we talk about autism. Um, some people can be a lot more safely weird than others for a wide variety of reasons. We are all white on this panel, and that
I'm not.
makes it. You're not?
No.
Okay, tell me more. I guess I've only
Sorry.
only seen fairly grainy pictures of you.
Right. Yeah. No. I don't want to get into it here, but that's not my ethnic identity.
No. Um, white passing, at least in some contexts, though. Maybe. No?
Depends on where.
Yeah.
I've been to places where I pass, and I've been to places where I definitely don't.
Yeah. Right. Interesting.
Yeah, I pass in California. Found out the hard way I don't pass in Alabama.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, um, I listened to a podcast once where the woman who was on it was saying how you get one weird, like you're allowed to be, you know, no visibly different in one way without it necessarily being too much of a problem. But the more weirdnesses you pile on top of each other, the harder it is to get by. That's kind of what intersectionality is about in a way, because all of the axes of oppression, all the ways that people are treated as lesser are seen as deviations from the normal, whatever normal is.
Yeah, and I think, we do have to acknowledge that where you get these intersections, I agree, there are people for whom it is safer to be weird than others. But I also think that that's why those of us who can be more weird should be, because it helps to normalize the weirdness. But that's a contradiction in itself. I don't know why I said that. I'm trying to
Don't
find
ruin
words.
it, David.
No, but you know what I mean. It makes the weird something less frightening and more human.
It adds
Yeah,
variety. Yeah.
we push the edges of it. There's almost, I think, even a moral obligation, if I dare say so, to push the edges of it because it makes this safer space. It's like, okay, yeah, I have some, measure of, some measure of privilege in various ways, and so if I'm out here being super super weird, then that creates more freedom for someone who might be in a less privileged position to be somewhat weird because the edge is out there. I'm sort of out there, we kind of get out there and make ourselves targets in a way by being very openly weird, and that creates a space, and there's sort of I think there is a moral imperative to push that edge and make more space, so somebody in a more vulnerable position can come out there and be weird and not be such a target, because there's people like us being even more weird and horrifying the normals even more.
Yeah. Sorry, carry on, Fergus.
Yeah, so I'm a teacher, and a lot of my students, I mean, it's obviously without any judgment at all. A lot of my students are really quite weird. Um, and I mean, to be fair, that's just true everywhere, right? Like people are weird. The normal is an almost entirely mythical ideal. And yet so many kids are ashamed of the things that make them weird, that make them different, that make them stand out. Um, so yeah, certainly in my role as an educator, like there are limits to how safely I can be weird, or how weird I can be safely. But uh yeah, I feel like I really need to be myself, to let kids know that it's okay to be yourself.
Yeah, and I recognize my privilege here in that in my day-to-day life, people just kind of accept that I'm weird. And it seems to be one of the things they like about me. But not everyone has that privilege. Some
Mm.
of us have family experiences where that weirdness is penalized in some way, and sometimes in quite extreme ways. But I was actually wondering, because I'm aware, Nick, we've got you here, and you co-authored the Weird Like webcomic, and I was quite interested to perhaps have a bit of a discussion around weirdness in fiction, because I think sometimes think, you know, like all art, it can be a more open canvas, a way of illustrating a world that we don't necessarily see in front of us. But I was wondering, you know, where does weirdness come into the creation of your of the Weird Luck webcomic for people who may not be so familiar with it?
Well, there's a particular dynamic that we're exploring in the comic around the nature of weirdness and weirding, which I think is really relevant here to what we've talked about so far, because you know some of us, you know, as has already been said, you know, as Fergus already brought into the conversation, we are, you know, we're just born weird. Our minds are just, you know, our whole cognitive style is just not going to do neurotypicality. It's just incompatible with that normative performance. And then we can choose to lean into it and do weirding as a practice, and that further alters our consciousness. Whether one starts, regardless of how weird one starts out, the act of leaning into it and the act of having weird experiences, having the sort of bizarre, magical, and cognitive and psychedelic experiences that weirdness leads us toward, makes us weirder. And so there's this, and I think this ties in with what Fergus brought in earlier about weird originally meaning fate. This idea that we're pursuing a fate or a destiny in a sense. We're moving towards becoming something by being weirder. And so what I'm playing with in the Weird Luck webcomic is that there's these characters who are born with weird luck, and they just they have particular, like, they're magnets for synchronicity and weird stuff happening to them repeatedly, and that living that way alters our consciousness in some way. And so with every character who has weird luck, you know, there's specific characters in the storyline who have weird luck, and with every character who has weird luck, they have a particular response to it in a particular way that it changes their consciousness. Like, what happens when your luck is so weird that you can't rely on causality? That changes your entire perception of how causality works and how reality works, and makes you into a stranger person in some way. And so that's one of the underlying themes that we'll see more of in the comic as it goes on.
I quite like that idea of the weird luck changing their sort of conscious experience of the world, because as a weird person, I have to say that some of the weird experiences that I have gotten myself into have been quite life-altering at times. And they're certainly not experiences I would have had if I wasn't weird. I Fergus or Tanya, do either of you have any sort of weird experiences that have made things weirder for you?
I mean, there was the time of the worm. Um,
I I haven't heard this.
no, so I
You
mean,
have to say more.
there were a few times in my youth where just really weird things happened. I didn't know what to make of it. So the time of the worms, me and a bunch of friends came out of a friend's house. It was late. You know, we've been hanging out until 2 in the morning or something. But on the pavement, on the sidewalk outside his house, there was like it looked like a stick about that kind of length. Um, I kicked it absentmindedly, and rather than doing the stick thing and going like that, it bent. It's like, wait, that's the longest worm I've ever seen. And it was this worm. One end of it was in the pavement, so I could only see one end of it, about, getting on for a foot long. Like, that's quite weird. Walked on, realized that there was another one a couple of feet onwards. and the neighborhood was filled with these unbelievably long worms, biggest worms I've seen in my life, more worms than I'd ever seen in my life, and that was it. Then we went home.
Well, what's
But it
cool
was just
about that,
such a bizarre experience,
but
and
that,
like,
yeah, that's cool because I bet like a not weird person probably wouldn't have even necessarily taken much notice of a stick-like thing on the pavement, you know. Um, I certainly find that being weird can open you up to seeing a side to the world that isn't necessarily visible to people who are consumed by normality. Tanya, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, loads of experiences, like Fergus just said, and some psychedelic experiences when younger, which was, I think there are a lot of us are quite attracted to that kind of side of life, aren't we? Because it's probably more normal to us than normality in a way, if that makes sense. But I don't know. I think the way that our weird brains kind of see things on a day-to-day basis, it is just a series of weird events after another, especially when you're witnessing other people moving around in such ways that seem weird. So we're labeled as the weird ones, when actually, if you've ever sat in a meeting with a bunch of neurotypicals, scratching your head thinking, how are you not seeing this? And all that kind of, like, who's the weird one, really, you know? But and that's just that's a daily basis occurrence. I mean, how many conversations have we sat there and had David and been like, no, somebody must have thought this, or you know, or somebody must have seen this. But yeah, I think as well, like a lot of my weird experiences come from my sensory experience, which is it can be kind of spiritual in a way, I think. Um, and also connecting with other weird people. I think because that doesn't happen a lot until we can get into a position where we know ourselves well enough to kind of curate our environment and be surrounded by other weirdos. We don't necessarily feel that connected to anybody or the world. So I think that can be quite magical as well, as a kind of, you know, coming into, when you're first coming into basically an environment full of weirdos that you may not have had access to, especially when you're younger, because everything is so controlled, isn't it? So you don't have the freedom to go out and find other weirdos as well. So that in itself is very magical. So yeah.
I would also like to just sort of zoom in on, you know, you mentioned like other people seeming like they're the weird ones, like something that I've said for years, because over the last sort of half a decade or so, pretty much everyone I interact with is neurodivergent in some way. And it's made me realize that weirdness really is sort of in the eye of the beholder to an extent, because I've realized when I'm not around other neurodivergent people, I feel really out of place and kind of like, this what are you doing? Like, I don't know what you're doing. Why are you doing it like that? That's really weird. But actually, like, there's this element of like, you get so used to being around other weird people that when you step back into the, I don't know, the mainstream world, I don't know how to describe it. I'm
Back
really
into the
trying to avoid using the
matrix,
word
or
normal,
yeah, where you have
but
to do
yeah.
that thing called work.
Yeah. Like when I step around, for example, as you mentioned, neurotypicals, they seem weird to me. But when I say that, like, I don't see being weird as a bad thing, but there is almost like a discomfort at times when their weird doesn't match my weird, if that makes sense.
Mm.
I feel like there's something to be said about discomfort, isn't there? Because a lot of the reason why weird people are treated badly is because by being weird, we force people to be slightly uncomfortable. Um, as discussed, we largely don't have any choice about being weird. So I don't think we should feel bad about making people a bit uncomfortable, but also, there are limits, aren't there? One of the things about weirdness is that it's associated with creepiness, in ways which are both fair and unfair. So, all of the ways which autistic people are weird turn out to be like ways that people find people creepy. Things like not making eye contact, not navigating personal space in expected ways, laughing at times when other people don't expect it. Um, all of these things mean that it's quite easy for weird people to come across as creepy, and I wish that I had better ideas about how to navigate that. I just mostly encourage people to be quite cautious about it and considerate, and like, be weird, but try to notice when you're making people excessively uncomfortable.
I know, Nick, you and we did a podcast a while ago now where we were talking about neuroqueer theory, and hang on, I'm losing my train of thought. We were talking about sort of how a lot of things are socially constructed. And I wonder if we could have some thoughts from you here, because I very much feel that, the inherent creepiness that's perceived in weirdness has been almost intentionally constructed by a world that kind of wants us to assimilate. And I wondered if you'd like to weigh in there.
I mean, yeah, I think so. It's, I don't think anybody's creepy to themselves. And, fellow autistic people don't register as creepy to me. But at the root of this is fear, I think. Again, I think that the driving force behind normativity in all its forms is this addiction to certainty and this fear of uncertainty, the fear of ambiguity, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of not knowing what's what. And that fear of uncertainty is such a driving force for most humans, and and the driving force behind hegemonic normality. So the weird are feared. They're figures of fear, and all of the hatred or ridicule or whatever else weird people encounter, at the bottom of that is genuine fear. So I think that shows up in the way that we get mythologized. And so, we have hundreds and hundreds of generations, of literature and story and art, where the evil characters are coded as weird. They're coded as queer. They're coded as autistic, even before that was a thing, even before there was a name for that. Just like, standards of standards of what's attractive and what looks wrong is very much about these particular societal norms. It's very much about who's got the power, about whiteness, and Disney villains are designed to look Jewish and to come across as a little queer. And it's built in, and we're raised with it ourselves. We're raised with this idea that, that certainly shaped my approach to life and art, and writing the Weird Luck webcomic, and all of that was realizing as a kid that the villains in comic books were designed to come across like me. They were designed to look like me. That I couldn't relate to the heroes, because all the villains were neurodivergent coded and weird coded and queer coded, and like, this is what you should fear. This person has something wrong with them. And I was like, oh no, these are the ones I relate to.
Although
Yeah,
there's something interesting there about a lot of the heroes also being really weird, right? Which is perhaps related to the fact that the heroes are also often feared. Um, there's something about possibilities. Again, it's like the heroes are the ones who have the power to control fate, which is one of the ways that weird is like the etymological root of it is described. Um,
Mhm.
because yeah, possibilities,
And I
looking at
think
things differently, doing things differently makes things possible. It drives the narrative apart from anything.
that's
So
happened more, right? That's happened. That's been a big shift in comics over the course of our lifespan, certainly. I mean, the X-Men is very much about that sort of thing, about that, these are the weirdos, and I think it's, that's been a shift because now, it's the weird people who make comics. It's the weird people who make good comics and good TV shows and such. And so we've watched that change, and it's very exciting, I think.
yeah, and I think I'm losing my train of thought again already. It's one of those days. Um, I can't remember what I was going to say. It will come back to me. Tanya, do you have anything to weigh in?
I think it's just like I get what you mean about the creepy thing, but for me, I think it's whatever can be societally mobilized against us, isn't it? I don't get the creepy thing, I get the aggressive thing. You're too aggressive, you're too outspoken, you can't be that blunt. But is that because I'm a woman? And I think that's the thing, isn't it? And I think that fundamentally, when we're looking at the way that society is constructed, the fear comes after, doesn't it? The fear comes after. It's just something that, it's like, oh, you can't be like that because that's not your role. That's not what you're supposed to do. And actually, the fear just comes from that, from being outside of that. Um, so yeah, and yeah, so creepy is never one I've got, but aggressive, blunt, you can't say that, you know, all of those things. And it just depends on what can be used to shut you down. And we see that in other things as well. We see, the way certain things are weaponized by other people. But actually, with like Nick was saying, with the generations of the X-Men, there's always been a minor celebration of weird, hasn't there? It's always been there. It's just, I think it was Robert Chapman that spoke about people being written out of history. Can you remember that one, David? Was it the philosophy of madness he was talking about, with like back in Victorian times, with all the different weird groups that were kind of polyamorous and genderqueer and all? So it's always been there. It's just
You
written out
remember
of the
them
narrative.
writing in their recent book, Empire of Normality. They talk about the fact that, like, they're talking about it in the context of neurodivergence and madness, and they're saying those people have always been there. But, we saw this huge increase when we moved over to sort of a Cartesian model of the body and Galtonian principles. We saw this huge influx in hiding those people away because, and I guess this comes back to Nick's point, because when you don't have normativity does give you predictability because you're telling everyone where to go, what to think, how to act, you know. And when you let people be weird, what you are saying is, I embrace the fact that anything is possible and anything could happen right now.
Mm, mm.
and of course, yeah, that scares people, right? It comes back to that. People fear uncertainty. If you don't know what could happen, like, oh, and obviously that it's not like autistic people are immune from fear of uncertainty. Very, very far from it. So in a way, that's relatable. That fear that we tend to inspire in people by just being different. Because yeah, not knowing what to expect is scary. It's
I'm
unsettling.
kind of interested though in why being weird is different, because sometimes I think that everyone is weird on the inside, and the rest, you just have some people who perhaps have an easier, it's same as you have some people who are better at the neurotypical performance, some people are better at whatever the normative performance. But that doesn't mean there's not weirdness inside of them. It just means it's been contained by the normative rules around them. And I sometimes feel almost uncomfortable. I mean, I do embrace it as difference, but also sometimes I feel uncomfortable calling my weirdness difference, because I think it is something that everyone could relate to if they really let themselves think about it.
Well, that's why they're so scared, right? That's why they're so scared, because they've they've been taught to be ashamed of their own weirdness. And it's just, I mean, we know that's the root, right, of, I mean, we've got all these studies around homophobia showing that it's the people who are who have more more gay inclinations that they've buried really deep, that are often the most violently homophobic, because they're terrified. That's where that's where the term phobia comes in. They're not scared of gay people. They're scared of what's in themselves. And I think that's the thing, is if we're out there doing this, it is once again about the possible. We represent possibilities, and people who are stuck in this normative performance look at the people who are openly weird, and it's like we suggest the possibility that they could be something completely different, that they could step outside of the normative. And that is absolutely terrifying to them, because they don't know who they would be then. I mean, that's why I think those of us who are born so, irrevocably weird do get into, exploring psychedelic experience and such, wild creativity and queerness. And so many of us are like, transgender, or just outside of the gender norms, that because we're already not doing normativity. We're already like, oh, we're out here anyway. I mean, I remember when I was, a teen, doing a lot of psychedelics and looking for friends to do them with. The more normative kids, the ones more embedded in normativity, were really scared of psychedelics, because they were scared they would go crazy if they took them. And I was thinking, how is anyone like, it was hard to relate. I was like, people have always told me I'm crazy. There's no fear of going, how can I be scared of something that's apparently already happened to me without me noticing? So yeah, I think that what's terrifying about us is the possibility we represent, is the possibility that, yeah, anybody could do it, because in fact, nobody is normal. It is a performance, and it's so easy to step outside it, except for the fear. The fear is the only thing that keeps people in it.
And I think perhaps that fear is even more kind of built up by the fact that they then have to realize that not only is there a possibility for them, but they might actually want that possibility, but they've been told they shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose that does make us scary as well. If we've always existed outside of the norm and outside of the weird and outside of what's acceptable, then it's that saying, isn't there? There's nothing more scary than somebody with nothing to lose. So it opens up the possibility, I mean, social conventions, when people, you can't say that. Why? Is it not true? Or you can't say that to that person. Why does it make it? I all the time, in a work capacity, we are constantly told in convention what we can comment on, or what we can't comment on, or what we're qualified to do or not qualified to do. And you're like, well, does it make it any less true? There's all that convention there. So actually, maybe we do have a slight advantage in the way that we're already comfortable with being uncomfortable, because we permanently have been uncomfortable. So that for us is our normal. So us pushing edges or pushing boundaries is that's not hot or cold for us. That's just existing.
One of the things I found interesting in my own weirdness, obviously part of that is the fact that I'm schizophrenic. Like I have a very weird relationship with reality. When I tell people about that particular aspect of my weirdness, they have one of two responses. They either question whether or not I'm dangerous because I hear voices, because modern contemporary society done a wonderful job of positioning people like me as being psychopaths and all sorts, because, by the way, psychopath is a completely different thing to schizophrenia. I have this conversation at least once a week. The other reaction people have is to tell me that, in ancient Greece, I would have been a holy man or something, And sometimes I wonder, like, have they ever thought to step outside of the fact that there's probably been millions, if not billions, of people who have existed on this earth with similar neurology to me, who were just like everyday people who were just weird. That was just it. They weren't seen as these people who either had to have divine information or be locked away. They were just people who had access to different possibilities. Because I sometimes find that frustrating for me as a schizophrenic, the fact that my particular weirdness there has to be some extreme. Like, can't we just have a weirdness we can coexist with as well?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's this. Oh, go ahead.
Carry on, Nick.
Oh, I was going to say there's this strange combination of I think you're onto something here. There's this strange combination with the weird of fetishizing us, like pathologizing us and romanticizing us at the same time. Yeah, and I think that's about the fear and what people project onto us. There's some projecting their own shadows onto us, their own fears about the worst they could be, and daydreams about possibilities, and somehow we become the receptacles in their minds for both of those things.
Yeah. And sometimes I find that when you have that kind of fetishized existence, people forget that there is a person in the middle of that existence with everything branching out from it, And yeah, do you know what? Like, I've been in my brain for 30 odd years. There are a lot of possibilities I've discovered, and I discover new ones every day. But at the center of it is still this person who goes about their day-to-day life and doesn't need to be the hero or the villain all the time necessarily. I'm sure I've been both to various people at various points in my life. But fundamentally, and this is why I like Weird Pride. It's because it's about being human, not some model of what a human is told to look like.
I like that. It doesn't have to be positive. It doesn't have to be negative. It can just be a thing, I think we discussed that before, haven't we, Fergus? When, everybody's like, monotropism is like really positive. I'm like, no, it's just a thing. It's just not really pathologizing and awful. That's all it is. It's just a thing that we are,
Pluses and minuses to everything, right?
Yeah. Instead of just having to be one extreme or another. Which are you going for today, David? Are you heroing or villaining today?
I don't know. Well, we'll decide. I haven't eaten dinner yet, so I might well be a villain soon.
Hangry one.
Yeah, I always say that Weird Pride Day, like, okay, yes, it's mostly for weirdos, for people who are quite happy to say, yes, I'm weird and I'm not going to be ashamed of it. But it's also for everybody, because everyone is weird somehow, right? Like the whole idea of a normal person, a local newspaper in the States tried to run they ran a competition to try and find like the normal person, the normal, the woman who fitted all of the measurements of the average American woman, and there was nobody. They couldn't find like an actual average person. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of power in people who might be, relatively normal, relatively capable of passing in normative society, um, to recognize how weird they actually are. And like, there are so many little ways that people are ashamed. Um, Society does this thing where kids are allowed to be fascinated by things and, in awe of the wonder of everything. And as we get older, like, part of the growing up process is just accepted generally to be kind of disenchantment. It's like you're not allowed to believe in magic anymore. You're not allowed to see things as being really wonderful anymore. It becomes shameful to be passionately fascinated by things. Um, and obviously that's completely terrible for monotropic people, for autistic people and so on, who are very given being fascinated by things intensely. But it's dreadful for the world at large. Like, love things, people. Don't be ashamed to love things and to be like obsessed about them if that's the way that you want to go. It's really, I don't know. I feel like there are a lot of tragic dimensions to living in a normative society.
You actually made me think of a quote from the article I wrote earlier today for Weird Pride, where I said, Weird Pride Day is the day when the boundaries between perceived mundanity and a colourful truth become a bit blurrier.
I love that blurrier.
I'm not, I've never quite understood why everyone tells me I'm a black and white thinker because I'm autistic, because everything looks real blurry to me, and it's not just because I need to get new glasses. Like, you, there's so much of what we're told is a fixed boundary between this and that. It's never that simple.
I think that goes into what Nick was saying earlier, all the things that we're accused of being in terms of like inflexible, black and white, rigid. Maybe those fears are coming from people who aren't looking inwards.
My mum wrote a book chapter called "Whose Normal Is It Anyway?" Which is entirely about this, really. It's taking all the ways that autistic people are described as if we're broken and turning it around and say, like, hang on, do you think you're flexible? Do you think you're being empathic?
Yeah, I agree. This is part of what's being projected onto us. I mean, you can tell, you're going to look at what's projected onto, a group, transgender people, autistic people, what's getting projected onto the pathologized or demonized groups. And that gives you, whatever it is, that gives you a perfect portrait of what's happening in the society that's doing the projecting. I mean, we the empathy thing, wow. I mean, we live in such a non-empathic society, and there's this real rise. I mean, if you think about it, like the 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 real turn, there's this dramatic turn away from empathy and towards an increasingly cruel and unempathic mainstream society in like the Reagan and Thatcher era. And that's exactly the historical period where the idea of autistic people lacking empathy came into being.
I think that there's a lot to be said for people projecting their own issues onto minorities. And I think it actually, in a way, I mean, I love autistic culture from the experiences I've had of it. However, the fact that we have sort of evolved this own culture of our own seems to have dragged a lot of people to project even more onto us. And I think there's something to be said for, you know, we have to build communities where there's more than just a single identity that binds us. Because quite often in online spaces, you'll have everyone's coming together because they're autistic, but there's more to us than just, we're not singular points. And I think people have a tendency of projecting onto these singular points and perhaps one of the ways we can do that is by showing the full possibility of who we can be rather than just reducing ourselves to single identities.
I want to say something here about all the different ways to be weird, and how it's a very common experience for people who are weird in one way or another to sort of cycle through different communities or experiences, like find groups of people who are weird in one relatable way or another. And then quite often discovering that, most of them are not autistic. So they're maybe not as much like you as you thought they were. It turns out they're just like bisexual role players or whatever. Um, but there's still things in common, and often quite a lot in common between different kinds of weirdos.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like to sort of I toy around with this idea quite a lot recently of an autistic rhizome rather than an autistic community. And you could take out the word autistic and really just turn the whole world into a rhizome if you really want to. And you have all these interconnected communities on a network where they're connected to each other because they all share people. People belong to multiple parts of the world, but none of them are fully dependent on the other one to exist. And the world I dream of is a world where you have this mutual coexistence and acknowledgement that people belong to various parts of the world without forcing them to depend on one particular group's views to exist. I'm aware we've been going for a while now, so it's probably getting close to time to wrap up. Does anyone have any closing thoughts?
Relating to that, and something that we've talked about, is the fact that autistic communities are not always friendly to everybody, and I worry about who we're not including. And yeah, I try to reach out to different demographics and try to make sure that the ground is friendly for them, but I'm sure that I don't always succeed.
I think
Well, I have to.
Sorry, Nick, carry on.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, where we have these communities forming, I think we have to be careful that we don't build our own sort of normativity within those spaces, because I see concepts that have gone around the autistic community so often that they've almost become rules that we have to live by, like an identity politics. And I think sometimes that can be quite restrictive, especially for people who are trying to explore their own neurodivergence for the first time, because it means people inadvertently feel like they're being gate kept out because they don't know the rules.
Yeah, there are so many unwritten rules, especially in online spaces, which is ridiculous, really, considering that we're classified as having social communication disorders and not picking up on the nuance. But yeah, there are an awful lot of unwritten rules, more so within autistic spaces, I would say, than neurotypical spaces. Well, depending on what space you're in, but there are an awful lot of it. And also, I think we have to kind of, a lot of that culture really that has developed really is self-protection. And I think any space that is for people that are classified as weird and villainized in a way can become very reactive and in a way of protecting itself, and that's if people are creating themselves a safe space, then they will guard it. And we have a lot of trauma within our communities as well, which also affects the way that we may experience the world. We're not just all one ready salted flavor of autistic, are we? There's a lot of different, nobody's the same. And there's more diversity within neurodivergence than anywhere else. Well, because I would say that, neurotypical people don't exist, really. I don't think they do. I think it's literally just a way those people are just lucky enough to identify and be comfortable with the idea of being labeled in that particular way, and that's all there is to it. And they can tick the boxes in order to be able to do that, or they, you know, they can keep it under wraps, or, you know, they're rich enough that, you know, their weirdness is not pathologized and it's just seen as eccentric, or they're academically gifted enough that, you know, we always think the academics, you know, they're all a bit weird, but, you know, they're doing great things, moving things forward. It, you know, it's the normal weirdos that I always think. The normal weirdos. And that is a thing. You know, the ones that don't, you know, when do I pick up my special skill? You know, where's my thing? And that's always the way, you know, the ones that don't have maybe that weirdness that makes them acceptably weird or exploitably weird. They're just plain weird. So yeah, I think that's my parting thought, even though I can't remember what that was because ADHD, but there we go.
Nick, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I gotta say, I mean, we've come around sort of to autistic community. I want to bring it back to weird and weird pride. I don't do autistic community anymore. I've come to the conclusion, I mean, you know, autistic people are not my community. There are some autistic people who I feel a sense of community with, the people right here in this call, for instance, for sure. But do I feel a sense of community with Elon Musk or with all the autistic incels? Not really, no. And frankly, you know, I mean, the only people who have made the mistake of trying to bully me for the past few decades have been autistic activists. The only people who have consistently plagiarized me in academia have been autistic scholars. That's not my community. And I think it's a mistake to build a community around any identity label. I don't, there's no community I identify with around a social identity, around a gender or an ethnicity, much less a race, which is intrinsically a racist concept, or a you know, a nationality, or a so-called neurotype, which is something I don't even fully believe in. So I build my sense of community around practices rather than identities. Identities are just a symptom of fear of uncertainty. They're highly normative. I mean, there's nothing liberating about identities. If there were, there wouldn't be corporate DEI departments that are obsessed with identity. So for me, it's all about the practices. It's who's engaging in queering, who's engaging in neuroqueering, who's engaging in weirding, and how. Who's engaged in the practice of empathy and compassion and love? Who's engaged in the practice of seeing what their highest potentials are for making positive contributions to the world and to the life of other people? All of these things are what matters to me, and that's who my community is. That's who I define my community. Are we able to do this practice together? Are we in some way accomplishing the same thing in the world? And that's so much more meaningful to me than any fixed identity. And I think that's part of the weirdness. It's like the very concept of identity as fixed identities as meaningful is something that I'm very into queering and weirding and making cracks in to open new possibilities.
I think that's a really good message to stop on. So with Pride Day, day to embrace the possible, no matter how improbable. So thank you to everyone who's been here this evening. And yeah, it's been good. Now I've got to, okay, no, I do know what I'm doing to turn this off. That's fine. We could have just been stuck here forever, you know, sort of 90 years from now, just be our skeletons sat here.
We'd be in good company.
We would. All right. Well, thank you to everyone who's come and tuned in this evening, and thank you, Tanya, Nick, Fergus, It's been a really good conversation, and yeah, I will catch you all in the next episode, which I don't know when it is because I don't keep track of those things. I wait for my computer to tell me I'm supposed to be doing something. So thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, David.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Right.